Greetings, welcome back to Black Bear News, where we are discussing climate change, abrupt climate change, and things adjacent. And we are going to continue to look at the ongoing climate situation and the ridiculousness of the response by the powers that be to the climate situation, which is small to nil. In in extreme ridiculous news today, or not today, but this is from a few days ago, but U.S. Energy Department rebrands fossil fuels as molecules of freedom with the goal, I'm sure, with some kind of ridiculous goal, end goal, which is, they're protected, of course. We're going to protect these fossil fuels by law and by whatever means necessary. Press release from the department said increasing export capacity is critical to spreading freedom gas throughout the world. This is not The Onion. This is The Guardian. America is the land of freedom. Freedom. As any politician will be happy to tell you, what you don't hear quite so often is that the stuff under the land is also apparently made of freedom as well. That is, at least according to a news release this week from the Department of Energy. Mark W. Menezes, the U.S. Undersecretary of Energy, bestowed a peculiar honorific on our continent's natural resources, dubbing it Freedom Gas, and a release touting the DOE's approval of increased exports of natural gas produced by a Freeport LNG terminal off the coast of Texas. Increasing export capacity from the Freeport LNG project is critical to spreading freedom gas throughout the world by giving America's allies a diverse and affordable source of clean energy. At this point, guys, you actually have to run screaming away from anything that has the name freedom in it. Freedom Towers, Freedom Gas. Yes. The concept of freedom gas may seem amorphous, but it's actually being measured down to the smallest unit. With the U.S. in another year of record-setting natural gas production, I am pleased that the Department of Energy is doing what it can to promote an efficient regulatory system that allows for molecules of U.S. freedom to be exported to the world, said Stephen Winberg. It's unclear if members of the Trump administration attempting to assign patriotic intentions to natural gas are aware of the silliness of the concept, but Rick Perry seems to believe in it. That's exactly what they're trying to do. What they're trying to say is that it's unpatriotic to want to curb fossil fuels, or to limit fossil fuel production, or to keep it in the ground. And actually, what I forgot to say about the Extinction Rebellion article that I read yesterday, I guess they're threatening life sentences for Extinction Rebellion protesters that fly drones near the airport. Life sentences. So they're going to start ratcheting up the punitive, the idea of extremely punitive sentences or reactions to anybody who's threatening the fossil fuel industry or threatening industrial civilization. 75 years after liberating Europe and from Nazi Germany occupation, the United States is again delivering a form of freedom to the European continent, the Energy Secretary said earlier this month, according to Yorak TV. And rather than in the form of young American soldiers, it's in the form of liquefied natural gas. Okay. This article was just so ridiculous, it froze my brain. This is from last month, or May 8th, yes, last month. UN Secretary General warns of total disaster if global warming isn't stopped. And I think we read something around this at the time. The United Nations Secretary General said the world must dramatically change the way it fuels factories vehicles and homes to limit future warming to a level scientists call nearly impossible. That's because the alternative would mean a catastrophic situation for the whole world. Antonio Guterres told the Associated Press in an exclusive interview. Gutierrez said he's about to tour Pacific Islands to see how climate change is devastating them as part of his renewed push to fight it. He is summoning world leaders to the UN in September to tell them they need to do much more in order for us to be able to reverse the present trends and to defeat climate change. I'm going to link this article below. I'm not going to read any more of it, but I'm going to go back to this first paragraph. The world must dramatically change the way it fuels factories, vehicles, and homes to limit future warming to a level scientists call nearly impossible. I'm going to move on. And this, lastly, I'm going to read this article from Truthout. After years of abuse, the Earth has sent its bill collectors. This is from May 28th by J.P. Sotil. Does Mother Nature have a sense of irony? To answer that question, look no further than the Lone Star tick. Although the tick's traditional range in the southeast and mid-Atlantic includes the eastern half of the Lone Star state of Texas, it gets its name from white star-like splotch on its back. But thanks to climate change, this nettlesome little creature is on the move. It's moving into the northeast as far as Maine, and it's gone well past its usual bailiwick in the Ohio Valley to make its way into the upper Midwest and into Wisconsin. It's not surprising that ticks, like half of all species, are moving with the climate changing, or with the changing climate. What is surprising is what the Lone Star tick brings with it. No, it's not Lyme disease, although warming catalyzed deer ticks are spreading that debilitating malady into new areas. Instead, the Lone Star tick carries another little known disease, alpha-gal syndrome. The term alpha-gal comes from the name of the sugar molecule that, according to the Mayo Clinic, can lead to hives, eczema, swelling of the lips, face, tongue, and throat, as well as wheezing, abdominal pain, diarrhea, nausea, or vomiting, headaches, and even the potentially deadly interruption of normal breathing by anaphylaxis. However, these symptoms may not follow after a bite. In fact, it may take a while for an infected person to feel the full impact of newly acquired syndrome. It's because alpha-gal syndrome often expresses itself hours after the infected person eats a big, juicy steak, or pork chops, or a cheeseburger. Yep, the Lone Star tick is spreading a meat allergy. It's severe, too. One unfortunate victim profiled in Mosaic cannot risk eating the meat of mammals and everything else that comes from them. Dairy products, wool and fiber, gelatin from their hooves, char from their bones. Alpha-gal's delayed trigger also makes it hard to diagnose. People often don't connect their symptoms with eating a meal they've eaten without consequence throughout their whole lives. Wow, that's pretty crazy. Is this call it some kind of climate change revenge on the meat eaters? If you haven't given up meat yet, you might want to consider it if you live in the areas where this tick is being found. That's a big deal in the U.S. where meat is king and it's cheap and plentiful, thanks in no small part to industrial-grade agriculture. In 2018, Americans broke their previous record for meat consumption, gobbling down 222.2 pounds of meat and poultry per person. Ugh. Sorry. I don't eat meat, but that just sounds like a whole lot of meat. According to a United States Department of Agriculture estimate, America's beef consumption is 4 times higher than the world average. According to the World Resources Institute, the consumption of dairy was also on track to hit an all-time high in 2018. To meet this insatiable demand for meat, Big Ag deploys heavily subsidized industrial-grade agriculture with massive feedlots that gobble up megatons of grains. These factory farms also suck up huge amounts of water. They generate epic amounts of ecosystem-denuding, water-containing runoff. And they produce billowing gigatons of greenhouse gases, both carbon dioxide, CO2, from the industrial complexities it takes to fuel these factory farms, and methane from the noxious flatulence produced by many millions of animals. Then those animals are transported to die on increasingly mechanized slaughter lines that whirl along at faster and faster speeds. Their carcasses get chilled or frozen and then shipped out by fleets of fossil-fueled trucks on their way to energy-sucking processing factories, to suburban supermarkets, and to fast food chains where people often sit in running cars, running SUVs, awaiting their share of the U.S.'s seemingly endless bovine bounty. So here's where Mother Nature steps in. Industrial agriculture, and meat production in particular, is a significant source of greenhouse gases. Americans trail only Uruguay and Argentina in per capita beef consumption, and the U.S. is by far the leader in climate-disrupting factory farming practices that in turn stoke anthropogenic climate change. But the changing climate across North America is catalyzing the expansion of tick populations, and now tick populations are spreading diseases like alpha-gal, red meat allergy to meat-gorging Americans. How is that for putting some irony in our diets? The Capitalism One credit card. For most scientists, that's a bridge too far. They'd understandably reject assigning Mother Nature with an anthropomorphic trait like the sense of irony, but this planet's macro-ecological system does have an undeniable sense of accounting, and it keeps a running tally, from alpha-gal syndrome to herbicide resistance. From rising seas to superstorms, we're watching Mother Nature's accounting system repeatedly expose the fatal flaw driving economic growth during the Anthropocene era. That flaw is the fallacy of externalities. The simple Wikipedia definition of an externality is a cost or benefit that affects a party who did not choose to incur that cost or benefit. Up to now, we've thought we were only imposing it, externalization, that is, to other human beings. Usually externalities impact those who are too politically or economically powerless to fight back. Hardy har. Externalities are only imposed on human beings. They're mostly imposed on the environment. Mainly imposed on the environment. That's why they're targeted, whether through offshoring polluting factories or dumping toxic waste into the commons like rivers, lakes, the seas, or air, or locating poisonous industries in political and financially disempowered neighborhoods and towns. Externalization is a quick, easy, and profitable way to take the true cost of doing a business and make someone else pay for it. Aren't humans grand? The idea of externalities doesn't just reflect our willingness to abuse others for profit, it also reflects a collective delusion held by those with power, the belief that they can exempt themselves from the closed loop that is Earth's accounting system. In the case of climate change, think of it like a CO2 credit card. Let's call it the Capitalism One card. We've been charging our skyrocketing carbon emissions to that card for many decades. Every car purchased, every plane ride taken, every Amazon Prime delivery selected, and every Big Mac picked up at the drive-thru has externalized the true cost of that purchase. Missing are the greenhouse gases that never get calculated into the purchase price of anything. Instead, we charge that cost onto our collective Capitalism One card. Just consider Lone Star ticks to be one of nature's little bill collectors. Alpha-gal is the cost, with interest. The same goes for the earthquakes and contaminated water that come from fracking re-injection wells. We use hydraulic fracturing to forcefully break open natural subterranean formations to release oil and gas that we blithely burn into climate-altering CO2 while also leaking climate-altering methane. Gotta love that freedom gas. Then, in an externality twofer, we take the wastewater from the process, which can become radioactive, and we dispose of it by re-injecting it into the ground through wells, which in turn Mother Nature bills us with contaminated water, earthquakes, and health problems. All the while, our mantra remains out of sight, out of mind, and onto our Capitalism One card. Now think of the many trillions of dollars of wealth that has been charged on that card since the start of the Anthropocene era, and more directly throughout the great acceleration of the industrial age. We've voraciously taken for granted resources from the earth and processed them to our own ends. Thanks to a toxic combination of convenient ignorance and willful, short-sighted indifference, we've simply loaded the true costs of those processes right back onto our de facto credit card, aka into the land, the air, and the water. Welcome to the due date. Have you heard of balloon payments? That's kind of what bomb cyclones are. Big one-time payments on a long-deferred account. These extreme climate-fueled events also exhibited a tragic symmetry with the alpha-gal allergy when this spring's bomb cyclone stoked flooding inflicted up to $3 billion worth of damage on livestock and farmland in the Midwest. This year saw 2 bomb cyclones, previously thought to be extremely rare weather events, right? Within a few weeks' time, they affected 25 states around the Midwest, the Great Plains, and the Mountain West. An AccuWeather analysis estimates the total cost of all the flooding will rise to $12.5 billion. It also led the government to government resource draining state of emergency declarations in Wisconsin, Minnesota, Iowa, Missouri, and Nebraska. With the last 2 being hit particularly hard, Beef Magazine called the bomb cyclone devastating because the timing couldn't be worse, as many farmers are in the middle of calving season. Some in Nebraska compared the devastation to the Dust Bowl, which, not coincidentally, happened to be a human-made disaster. And that's just the tip of a rapidly melting iceberg. The 2018 Pacific typhoon season hammered nations around Asia to the tune of $18.4 billion in damage. In 2018, natural disasters generated $80 billion in insured losses, which is well above the inflation-adjusted average for the last 30 years of $41 billion, according to the Munich Reinsurance Company. In 2017, the Munich Reinsurance Company also found that insurance claims spiked to a record $135 billion due to the combination of hurricanes Harvey, Irma, and Maria, with wildfires in California, which also created overall economic losses of $330 billion. The U.S. Air Force is struggling with a $4 billion shortfall as it struggles to find the $5 billion it needs to remediate the massive damage done by 2018's Hurricane Michael and this year's bomb cyclone fueled flooding. The U.S. Air Force has a shortfall of $4 billion. Isn't there, trillions of dollars just wandering around aimlessly in the DoD halls? How are they short $5 billion? New Orleans is facing a $14 billion bill to counter the combo of rising sea levels and sinking levees that were rebuilt by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers after Hurricane Katrina wiped them out in 2005. The Government Accountability Office estimated in 2017 that climate change had already cost U.S. taxpayers over $350 billion during the preceding decade. Even more dauntingly, researchers at the Pentland Center for Sustainability and Business at Lancaster University in the United Kingdom estimated that the climate change-driven feedbacks in the Arctic currently driving up the rate of warming could add nearly $70 trillion to the overall cost of climate change, even if the world meets the Paris Agreement climate targets, according to a report in the National Geographic. To put that in perspective, global GDP in 2017 was $80 trillion. Even the staid Bank of England recently warned of a sudden and severe loss of up to $20 trillion if and when stranded assets like unburnable carbon become worthless during the peak of the climate crisis. Yeah, in other words, all the investments in hydrocarbons could be zeroed out by the maelstrom of climate change. The Bank of Canada recently echoed this warning and predicted both fire sales of these stranded assets and transition risks from climate-stoked decarbonization. The Bank of England also said climate change will trigger a disorderly transition to the new economic reality of a climate-altered world should the finance sector fail to change investment and business practices to meet the needs of lower environmental impact, according to a report in The Telegraph. How's that for a bill coming due? Then in February of this year, analysts at Morgan Stanley said they expect climate change to negatively affect dozens of industries like agriculture, oil, and gas production in the short term, and real estate, leisure, and consumer retail in the long term. Yeah. Well, eventually, yeah. Lots of houses are going to be worth nothing. And, the travel industry just won't be what it was when everybody's worried about feeding themselves. As Risk and Insurance reported, climate change is already affecting food supply chains for products like chocolate, vanilla, avocados, coffee, and wine, changing how fine art is protected and transforming the energy industry. Consumers and markets are adjusting too. Even as ticks spread the alpha-gal meat allergy, Burger King is responding to growing demand for the plant-based Impossible Burger. It's been spread nationwide, not by ticks, but by the franchisees after a smashing test run in St. Louis. So, what's funny is actually Burger King has had a veggie burger for a long time and nobody even knew about it because they never, ever, ever, ever advertised it. But it was just stuck in the corner of the menu. I knew that they had a veggie burger, so I would always stop at Burger King and get a veggie burger. And everybody's like, Burger King has a veggie burger? Yeah, they carried a veggie burger, but they would never tell you that they had it, which is funny and sad and ridiculous. At the same time, Carl's Jr. is featuring Beyond Meat's plant-based meat alternative. That success fueled its new initial public offering IPO to the tune of $3 billion, a $3 billion valuation. Yes, I had to say that 3 times. Essentially, IPOs are Wall Street's first chance to render judgment on the viability of new public businesses. In the case of Beyond Meat, it's been dubbed the most successful IPO of 2019 thus far. It even surpassed the much-anticipated IPOs of CO2-generating rideshare companies Uber and Lyft. In fact, meat alternatives are becoming so popular that the meat industry is working at the state level to outlaw the use of the word meat on meat alternative packaging. It's a sure sign tastes are changing. Still, these are not the kind of shock to the system changes some see as the only hope for averting the catastrophe predicted by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change if humanity does not meet the Paris Accord target of limiting global temperature increase to between 1.5 and 2°C. That, according to a report in Nature, would mean reducing our collective carbon emissions by almost half by 2030 and then achieving carbon neutrality by 2050 to meet this target. And that, my friends, is also too slow. But it is also not insignificant that elemental behaviors like eating are beginning to change, particularly as people in the U.S. have finally crossed the tipping point from climate skepticism to climate dread. Like all human beings, Americans are starting to see, feel, and pay for the impacts of our prolonged, supposedly externalized overuse of hydrocarbons. Sadly, the distribution of the cost of human activity doesn't always bend toward symmetry or justice. This year, Mozambique suffered through 2 deadly cyclones, Idai and Kenneth, that left entire cities underwater, left many thousands stranded, and racked up billions in damage. In Mozambique and the Philippines and in climate-exposed places like Bangladesh, people who have contributed the least to the climate credit card often bear the brunt of our Capitalism One card's unsettled account. They literally cannot afford it either. It's yet another example of the all-too-human cost of externalization. The upshot, though, is that nature doesn't just punish bad behavior. With a huge bill, it pays dividends if and when we're willing to settle our accounts. Mother Nature tends toward an ecologically balanced budget. The problem is that we are not just deeply in arrears, but as Earth Overshoot Day shows us each year, we are wantonly piling on even more debt. That's the day when humanity overshoots what the planet can provide us in one calendar year. Everything consumed after that threshold is crossed, cannot be replenished, and we are officially in the red. Last year, that day was August 1st, the earliest ever. Those are debts we may never be able to repay, but that also means it is imperative that we begin paying as we go. We have to stop relying on our Capitalism One card to defer the true cost of what we exploit and consume. Consider also that we overshoot the Earth's carrying capacity every single year. So it's not just that we overshoot it every year at a certain date and then we're in the red. We overshoot and then we're in the red and we're in the red and then we're so far in the red we don't even know where the black is. If not, Mother Nature will keep on tabulating the cost of our appetites and evolving new ways to collect on our debts. One way or another, our collective account will be settled because there are no externalities in nature. I hope you all enjoyed that article, which speaks the truth about where we are, where we sit on the timeline of climate catastrophe. We're not in a good space. We're in the tail end of a jumbo jet. That is going down very quickly. And we're going to have to do a lot to pull back on the throttle or pull back on the rudder and get ourselves level. Just to get ourselves level would be an extremely amazing accomplishment. And I don't know how we're going to do that, but try we must. Try we must. Keep on spreading the word. Keep the faith. Keep getting off grid. Keep growing your own food. Keep using less. I was just thinking while I was reading that article that actually all the homeless people in Los Angeles and the homeless around the country probably might be better off when the economic and the climate catastrophe starts taking people out from under. They're really not going to have a good time dealing with it. But people that have been on the street or living, off the land or living, by other means or living with very little are probably going to be more well adapted to surviving the next few years. So that doesn't mean that you can't be in training, living a simple life and living with less. I highly recommend it. That's all I have for you today. Thank you so much for your eyes, your ears, and your conscience. If you would like to support this channel, you can do so at the links below. Until next time, peace.